Good morning and welcome today. We're so glad to have you with us. Today is Monday, March 2nd, 2026. It's 10 a.m. We are here for a work session regarding our countywide housing needs assessment in the Commissioners' Conference Room. We're glad you're joining us today. It's an important conversation. I'm Larimer County Commissioner Jody Shag-McNally, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners, and joining me at the conference table are Larimer County Commissioner John Kafalis and Commissioner Kristen Stevens. Also with us is our County Manager, Lorenda Volker. Our Assistant County Manager, Lori Cadrich, is off to the side, but she is here as well. And I'm going to turn this over to Aaliyah Rodriguez, our Housing Program Manager. I hope I have that correct. And she will introduce all of our guests. And we're looking forward to hearing about this Larimer County Regional Housing Needs Assessment. Thank you, Aaliyah, and welcome to all of our guests.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, all. As stated, my name's Aaliyah Rodriguez. I'm the Housing Stability Program Manager. I'm not going to talk too much this morning because I'd like to give a bulk of the time over to our presenter. As a reminder, we're reviewing our draft of our Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and I want to start off thanking Department of Local Affairs for funding a lot of this project through the Strong Communities Grant, along with our partners who also participated and funded part of it, our City of Fort Collins and City of Loveland, who are attending today. I'll hand it over to our guest, Molly Fitzpatrick with Root Policy, who conducted this project.
Just make sure I'm on there. Good morning, commissioners. Thank you again for the time, and thanks for the intro, Aaliyah. My name is Molly Fitzpatrick. I'm a managing director at Root Policy Research. We're a Denver-based consulting firm that focuses specifically on housing challenges, housing needs, and community development. So we work with lots of local governments throughout Colorado, but also all over the country, assessing these types of needs. So looking at housing needs and also working through housing strategies. So really excited to be with you today to present the findings on this draft study. As you all know, this is kind of starts with housing needs, and that it does roll into an ongoing or forthcoming project that looks at strategies and actions as well. So we'll get into that just a very little bit toward the end. I do want to have a conversation with you about what that looks like. And sort of teeing this up. So we don't want the analysis or the data to be sort of the end of the project. That is part of what we really want to talk through today. So the goal today is really to talk through some of the findings, answer any questions that you might have about the data or the analysis or any of the needs that we found, and then also start forward looking to some of those needs or to some of those actions to address needs as well. So looking forward to that part of the conversation. As you all know, in general, the county has looked at housing needs before, but now there's sort of a fresh requirement from the state to take a look at these. That also does unlock potential housing preferences from the state as well. And so a lot of this is kind of in similar format to what you've seen before from housing needs, but we're adding a few of those state requirements in as well. And so as we look at how this project flows, there's lots of resident and stakeholder engagement. I'll give you a recap of that. There's also lots of data analysis around demographics, economics, but mostly focused on housing inventory and market trends, and then how that translates into housing needs, both current and future, and then what kind of resources, barriers, and recommendations to address those needs. I do really want to highlight just the regional approach. This is not on this slide. I just jumped ahead anyway. But the regional approach, I think, is really important and is a great way to do that. It's not an absolute requirement to look at this regionally, but it's a really practical it's a really practical approach to understand kind of regionally what's happening in the county, what's happening in the communities within the county, because housing doesn't always follow jurisdictional boundaries, as you know. And I think particularly as a county, you have a real advantage to looking at this regionally, because the county has lots of opportunity, obviously, for direct influence on unincorporated areas, but also kind of that collaborative regional approach to help understand housing across city municipal boundaries within municipalities, and look at how can the county help catalyze solutions within municipal boundaries, in addition to really taking some of that direct look. And so that's one of the reasons we love looking at this regionally, and really appreciate the collaborative effort that your region has taken on this, and hope to continue that work forward as we start to look at housing action plans for those jurisdictions as well. As with lots of studies that you hear from consultants, we have lots of jargon that we throw around in the housing realm. I'm not going to walk through everything in this methodology and terminology, but I did want to make sure it was available in the slide deck for folks that might want to take a look. I do want to highlight just kind of two things that might impact how we have a conversation today. One is geography. So as I mentioned, we're doing this regional approach. When I say Larimer County in the data, I'm generally referring to the county as a whole. However, there are also data in the study, as you will have seen, that focus specifically on unincorporated county. But just today for our conversation, when I say Larimer County, I mostly mean the whole county, including municipalities. When I say unincorporated, that's focused specifically on those unincorporated areas. I also just want to do a quick kind of refresh on AMI. We throw that term around a lot in housing. It means area median income. It is looking at what's that middle middle household at the very middle in terms of income. The reason we talk about it a lot is because it is how housing programs talk about eligibility for programs, and it also gives us a way to kind of look at incomes over time, but with kind of a baseline metric around relativity. And so we're talking about percentage of AMI. That 100% AMI is right in the middle. In Larimer County, that's about $100,000 for a two-person household. AMI changes in terms of the income limits that HUD uses. It's different by different household size, and so those program eligibilities are not static. They move around a little bit for household size, but when we're talking about it, just like mentally, if I say 50% AMI, that's about half of 100, so you think about, oh, that's 50 grand when I'm saying that. 30% AMI, that's around 30 grand for a two-person household. That's just a rough estimation to help you process it as we're going. That's why we're using AMI, because that's kind of the common housing terminology. All right, so jumping in, there are lots of good reasons to work to address housing needs. We are not just focused on one component of the spectrum of housing needs. We really understand that our objective here is to have a balanced housing stock that allows you to have this full life cycle community, but that also has lots of benefits, both fiscal benefits for county and its municipalities, as well as social benefits for your residents. And so just understanding that housing is really integrally connected to lots of other outcomes and quality of life issues. We're going to start with a quick overview of demographic and economic trends. I'm going to move through some of this pretty quickly. I am more than happy to stop and answer questions or go back after we get through some of the presentation as well, so please don't hesitate to flag me if you have a question about that. I'm going to try to move through some of it quickly. Yep, go ahead.
And maybe you addressed this, and I was processing other things, but can you expand and clarify to me what is a balanced housing stock?
Yeah, great question. And it's not necessarily like a technical definition of that. I think when we say that, we just want to emphasize that the ideal for a community is to have housing that accommodates a wide range of life cycles. So you're having housing that works well for young adults, having housing that works well for families, having housing that works well for aging adults as well. And so when we say balance, we mean a balanced price point that accommodates kind of a full range of incomes. We also mean balanced in terms of type. So understanding that different people have different preferences, or different housing types have different preferences in terms of how big of a house, how small of a house, if it's attached, if it's not attached, and that those all come with kind of different trade-offs as well. So really just saying we want to have a lot of options for people so that housing choice is really a choice, that you're not like, oh, this is my only option.
If I might and I apologize, colleagues, because I just had some conversations today, to build off of that. I'm assuming that this needs assessment also assessed that maybe, back when I was younger, needs for housing or goals for housing might be different than my three children who are in graduate school and stuff, and have different ideas of what kind of housing they might need or want because of pricing or anything. Is that kind of taken into this assessment or addressed?
Yes, absolutely. And great point that those preferences are often shifting. And certainly we've seen generational shifting, both in terms of preference, but also in terms of affordability. We'll talk about some of those long-term trends in terms of affordability. We will also talk through at a real high level the survey analysis that we've done. So there was a pretty extensive survey of residents, and a lot of that asked about what kind of housing are you looking for? What kind of housing are you willing to accept? What kind of housing, where do you want it? And those types of preferences. So we'll get into that for sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So looking first at just kind of key trends that are specifically impacting housing choice related to your demographics. As you probably know, the county is growing. You've had pretty steady growth over time. That is expected to continue. Weld County is growing faster than Larimer County, so there are some broad regional shifts across northern Colorado. But broadly speaking, you're growing, you're continuing to grow, and you're aging, as are most places, certainly in the country and in our state as well. Right now, you're about 17% of your population is over 65. Which certainly impacts kind of what housing looks like in terms of those choices. You've had a slight decline in home ownership rates. That's not always a bad thing, so I don't want to pretend that, home ownership should never go down. Sometimes that's good because it means you're adding rental stock that's needed. However, it is important for us to look at, are there barriers to home ownership within that, and is that contributing to that trend? We primarily see those declines in home ownership in the income range that's about $50,000 to $100,000 per year per household. That is historically an income where we have seen entry-level home ownership, and we're seeing it less currently. You've had rising wages and rising incomes, so that's a positive trend. You can see exactly the percentage and nominal amounts of income across this bottom graphic here, with that top line, or kind of orangey yellow, is median owner income, blue is median household overall, and then the green is median renter income. So we're seeing increases across that. That did outpace inflation, so they were rising. It was rising faster than inflation. It wasn't rising faster than home prices, though, right? And so when we say inflation, that's kind of a whole bundle of goods. So some positive aspects to that, but those incomes are not enough to keep up with home prices. We'll talk more about that as we go. In commuting and out commuting have increased a little bit over the last 5 years. You still have a majority that both live and work in the county, about 60%. And not surprisingly, also an increase in working from home, kind of pre-COVID, post-COVID stats on that. You've more than doubled in terms of the percentage of folks that are working from home right now. So we think about that too in terms of housing preferences. Yeah, go ahead.
Commissioner Stephen.
Yeah, with the in commuting, do we have any demographic stats on like income for the in commuting? Because I mean, what I'm thinking of is, yes, that's good that 60% live here and work here, but the 40% that don't, are they doing it because they can't afford to? I mean, my hunch is yes, but do we have any data to back that up?
There's no publicly available data that gives us any good cross-section of incomes related to in-commuting, so we don't necessarily have data. We did ask some in-commuting questions in our resident survey. I don't have slides on those today, but there's a little bit of a deeper dive, and most of what we found is that it's a mixed bag. So in terms of your commuting, sometimes it's households operating split, managing to split commutes and going different directions. Sometimes it's just, well, I live here and then my job changed and that sort of thing. So yes, I will say certainly affordability is impacting those in commuting rates, but we don't have super clear data on the exact proportion that's the primary driver, if that makes sense. But I think, as you also look at where in commuters coming from, I mean, particularly your relationship to Weld County does have more affordable housing. And so we see a lot of folks that move there for the affordable prices and are still willing to drive. So jumping into a little bit more of the housing-specific stock trends, we're going to look at housing production pace, as well as some of the price trends as well. So the first thing that we're looking at here is just housing production. And the way we think about that is, are you keeping up with demand or not? And the short story, I guess, or the summary story, and these are showing percent change over two different periods of kind of all the things that we look at. So we look at your units is kind of the production, and how does that compare to demand as we measure that by population, households, and jobs. And so when we look over the long term, so since 2010, your housing production has fallen a little bit behind your job growth. You had really rapid job growth, especially in kind of the 2010s, and your production didn't keep up with it. So basically, your economy was growing faster than your housing production. That puts constraint on supply. If we look at just the most recent 5 years for which we have data, so that bottom line of graphics, you're starting to see that equalize out. So you've done better, I guess, as a county overall at keeping pace with economic growth over the most recent years. We will see kind of how that plays out. Right now, production has been fairly strong or consistent with that job growth. However, it's getting harder to make developments pencil because of our current financing structure right now with higher interest rates. It's harder for people to buy houses. It's also harder for developers to build houses because they're borrowing money to do that as well. So a little bit remains to be seen if that pace will continue. But in the most recent, you've been keeping up. In terms of housing type, you've also been diversifying your housing stock a bit. So this shows the distribution of different housing types. And we'll look kind of at Larimer County at the top bar there. So you've added a little bit more diversity in terms of smaller attached products, duplex, triplex, fourplex, and added some multifamily. You've added single family nominally too, but when we look at it as a proportion, still a strong majority, but you have added some diversity, which is great. That helps create price point diversity as well. When we look specifically at the rental market, the broad story is you had really steep rent increases, particularly between 2018 and 2023. And then the last couple of years have kind of mellowed out in terms of rent increases. So it's been fairly static the last 2 years, but that's on the heels of really rapid increases. And so still a real challenge in terms of the rents. So that easing the last couple of years is great. It doesn't fully offset those rapid increases you had the year before. And we're still seeing really low vacancy rates, which means the market's still a challenge. The market's still really tight. Yes, Commissioner Collis?
Commissioner Kafals, I see your hand is raised.
Here we go back to the previous slide.
Sure.
You're talking pretty fast, Molly.
I'm sorry. I'll try to slow down.
Can you offer a little bit in-depth explanation of the reduction almost invariably in mobile home, manufactured housing? I think
Yes, great point.
2023 they've decreased, and what's happening to the stock regarding mobile home?
Yep, great question. And that's more that other housing types are increasing and mobile home we're not adding mobile homes. And so proportionally, it's a smaller proportion. It's less that we're losing those mobile homes and more that everything else is increasing, whereas mobile homes is staying static. Absolutely.
Any other questions, Commissioner Kafals? Please proceed, thank you.
Sure thing. So short story on the rental, you still got low vacancy rates. That easing last couple years on rents is great. It's not fully offsetting kind of the steep gains from the previous. And if we look at that a little bit more in depth, so the last slide is really showing kind of what's that average rent, which is helpful for trends, but doesn't show us everything that's going on. And so in this graphic, we're looking at what's the distribution. So among all of the rental stock that we have, where are those hitting from a price point perspective? And if you look at kind of the dark, the black, that's 2010. On that graphic, you can see most rental units were priced sort of between $600 a month and $900 a month in 2010. The dark blue that's kind of hidden behind the green shifts us up. That's 2018. Most units in that time were between about 1,000 and 2,000. And then in 2023, we look at that distribution is shifted up even more into those higher priced rental units. And so what we're seeing here is just continued increase of rents across the whole distribution. So it's not just that you're adding more at the high end, it's that all of that stock is kind of shifting up in terms of rental prices, which means you've lost a lot of what we call naturally occurring affordable housing stock on the rental side. So that's stuff that doesn't have an income or deed restriction. It just is in the market and it's priced low enough for people to afford. We're losing some of that as rental prices have gone up. Similar stories on the home purchase market or the sales market. So this is showing sales data. It's got Loveland, Fort Collins, and Larimer average prices there on those blue lines. You can see, again, pretty steep increases, really consistent increases since 2012, but really steep kind of in that 2018 to 2022 range. You can see those sharp blue lines going very pointed upwards, as you can see. And in this case, we're comparing that to those dashed lines, or what is the affordable price at different income levels measured as AMI. And so what's impacting where those dashed lines are going, the affordable price is impacted both by what incomes are on average, but also what mortgage rates are doing. And so this factors in changes in mortgage rates, which you can really clearly see in 2022 when mortgage rates went up. Affordability goes down, right? Because you're spending more of that payment on interest instead of on a home purchase price. So that affordable price drops significantly. And that was happening at the same time as prices were still going up. And so I think what's really impactful about this kind of long-term trend, particularly if you look at kind of that, what was affordable to a 120% AMI household back in the late 2000s, 2008 to 2014 even, a household that was earning 120% AMI could afford a higher price than was average in the county, right? But now we have almost a $300,000 gap between a 100% AMI household and the current price. And so just a really stark contrast of kind of what was affordable at those levels compared to the average home price. And we've really had a strong diversion in that. Some of that is driven by interest rates and could be, we could get a little softening there, but a lot of it's still driven by the price increases as well. So just seeing a decline in affordability. You see that as well in this graphic, which is showing the distribution of sales by price. And the gray bars are kind of in this 2018 to 2020. We look at a couple years at a time to get a lot of data. And then the blue bars are 2024 and 2025. So you can see 2018, 2020, lots of homes available in that $300,000 to $500,000 range. By 2024, 25, that's really shifted up to, $500,000 or higher. for the most part. I also want to highlight, though, the darker shading on each of those bars represents attached homes. So think townhomes, duplexes, even condos as well. Those tend to hold more affordability and offer more affordability. So you'll see kind of more of the line at the lower end is that darker shading that's attached. It's important to think about that just as we think about what can we encourage going forward in terms of affordability. And some of that conversation has to include what product types are we getting. So that's kind of the market perspective in a very quick flash. Now we're going to look at how do those market trends relate to the incomes that we talked about. So we're kind of putting it together now. We looked at incomes, we looked at prices. Now we're going to say, how does that actually affect the community affordability around some of these, and what are our housing needs? One way we look at that is looking at the proportion of households that are what we call cost burdened. That's an industry-wide term that basically means if you're spending more than 30% of your gross income on gross housing costs, then that's what we call cost burden. In this graphic, that's represented in two forms. If you're spending more than half your income, that's severe cost burden. That generally is what puts a household into what we would call at risk of homelessness. You're living pretty precariously if you're at that 50% or more. So this is showing kind of where that falls in terms of moderate cost burden and severe cost burden. But broadly speaking, the county overall, about half of renters, just over half of renters are cost burden, about a quarter of owners are cost burden. We've got about 50,000 households total that are cost burdened between those two. You've got about 24,000 households that are severely cost burdened. That housing stability also starts to flow through when we start to look at people who have experienced homelessness. I know you've done a recent regional study on that, so we're kind of pulling in a lot of that data as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel on that. But based on that study, the estimate was around 7,000 people that had experienced homelessness. That's pulled from a couple different sources within that analysis as well. But that's just giving you a sense of kind of the number of households who have some housing instability or we have some concern in that front. Another way that we look at affordability is what I've hinted to a couple times, just looking at our incomes keeping up with housing prices. And this graphic shows a couple different measures of income. Those are the green bars over on the right and how much those have changed over the most recent 5 years for which we have data, compared to the blue bars, which show you a couple different measures of housing prices. And broadly what we're seeing is that none of our income measures kept pace with the home prices as those went up, and that doesn't even account for interest rates. So even before we layer on that interest rate issue, incomes were not keeping pace with the increase in home prices. So that's making homeownership less affordable. When we look at renters, we do see, so wages didn't quite keep up with the change in rents. The median renter income was a little bit higher than the median rent increase. However, that doesn't mean there's no needs in the rental market, as we'll look at next when we look at kind of the distribution. Also, when we see a really high renter income increase, typically what that says is that it means you've got an influx of higher income renters that are moving in and are renting. You've also got renters staying renters longer, even as they increase their income, right? So typically, or historically, I should say, we've seen, renters hit sort of a certain income level, and then they start looking for home ownership, and then they exit the rental. We're seeing higher income renters stay renters a little bit longer, which makes it look like renter incomes are higher, which is true, but that doesn't mean they're higher for everyone.
Commissioner Foss, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you. Do the changes in local ordinances regarding the ability of unrelated folks to live together, more people, how has that impacted what you're describing?
That's a great question. We're not necessarily specifically looking at that in these data. I do think, conceptually, we think that's a good thing from a policy perspective because it allows people to create a housing situation that accommodates their needs without sort of unnecessary limitations on that. And so I realize that's a trickier subject in a college community. That's typically where we've seen more regulation around that. But I would say it's too early to tell the extent to which that's impacting people's housing choices in the data, just because our data are lagged from that to some extent. It does allow for, it allows people to have more options within housing, and so that can be a positive thing. And we'll talk a little bit, or we talk a little bit about overcrowding in the report. I don't have a ton on it in this slide deck. That's not something that we're concerned about as a result of that legislation.
It just seems that, at least theoretically, conceptually, that if you're in a household and your rental costs are less because of the situation, then in theory you have more disposable income.
Right.
That perhaps you could put into savings if you're intending to stay here or for, a down payment on a home ownership
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah, and it does create that flexibility for folks, for sure. So, as I mentioned, we're kind of talking about that renter, that at the median, it looks like, yeah, renter incomes are up. But when we start to look at that a little bit more directly in terms of what we call an affordability gaps analysis, and this is really where we're looking at what is the supply relative to the demand within Larimer County. And so we're looking for where is that not aligned, right? So we look at the distribution, the income distribution of renters, what they could afford for rent, and then we compare that to actual units across that distribution as well. So we're saying, okay, are there enough units for people in these different income bands if they were to rent affordably? And shocker, the headline is that no, there's not. So there is a shortage of affordable rental units for households earning less than 50% AMI. That's about where we see the market starts to serve kind of proportionally at about 50% AMI. Below that, there's simply not enough units to serve those households. You got about 21,000 households in that price range or in that income range. You've only got about 11,000 units there. So we've got about a 9,700 unit gap. Those people are housed, they're just paying more than we would like to see for those homes. So this is an affordability shortage, not a production shortage necessarily, which means that these affordable gaps that we talk about, these can be addressed either through subsidizing existing units, helping offset some of the payment, or building new units that are in those price ranges. But it's important we're going to talk about production needs next, and so I just want to distinguish that when we're looking at this gaps analysis, we're looking at people that are already living in Larimer County and whether or not they're lined up well. If you've got income-aligned housing and you don't, right? You're short at below 50% AMI on the rental side. On the for sale side, the market really doesn't start serving proportional first-time buyers until about 120% AMI. And so we're less focused on calculating a specific number on the ownership side because we know not all of these first-time buyers or renters are going to convert into home ownership. So that's why that's in a percentage point instead of in a unit gap. But the goal of this is less about precise numbers, and it's more about understanding that when we look at programs, or if you want to look at subsidies or incentives, the places that your market is failing is 0 to 50% AMI on the rental side and 0 to 120% AMI on the ownership side. So when you think about programmatic solutions, when you think about policy solutions, targeting those within those AMI ranges is what's going to help you meet the needs of residents where the market cannot meet that need. So this is where you have the biggest market failures from a price point perspective.
I'm going to pause you there. Commissioner Stevens, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, so we do potentially have for sale units available for people that are making 120. But would they have to have, would that allow that they would have to have that down payment saved to get to that affordability?
Yes.
And what would that look like? So, like, I may have 120% of area median income, but I have to save $50,000 or $60,000.
Yep.
To get there. So to me, we're not serving. To me, that means we're not serving even the 120 because that feels like a very unachievable number for young. There again, if you're paying a lot for your rent. How are you saving $50,000 or $60,000?
It is a great point and absolutely true. So that's not fully captured in this, but you'll certainly see that need expressed when we get to some of the resident survey responses because we heard that over and over and over. What do you need the most to help with your housing? Help with a down payment, help getting a loan. And so I think down payment assistance is certainly a crucial component to remove some of those barriers to home ownership. So that helps us understand kind of where, from an AMI perspective, are the greatest needs. We also look at production needs. This specific analysis is really tailored to what the state wants to see, but it's a really good exercise, and it looks at both kind of what do you need right now from where are you undersupplied. That's based on kind of overcrowding and vacancy rates, and then we look at how much are you going to grow over the next 10 years and how many units you might need for that, based on the state demographer's projection of those needs. Then we apply that across your current rental distribution, your current income distribution, to understand what price point would be ideal to hit with those and what tenure, so renter versus owner. So broadly speaking, the county needs almost 18,000 units over the next 10 years to keep up with projected growth. And this shows you kind of the graphic there shows you the balance of where that would hit AMI wise. Again, based on that last slide, we sort of assumed that the market would mostly take care of kind of the upper end of that, but that in order to actually deliver those units in a way that serves your existing residents or your future residents, you'd want to help support production at those lower AMIs. When we look just at unincorporated county, you can see that there's detailed data in the full report around that. Unincorporated is projected to need about 1,400 units.
Commissioner Cafalas, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Molly. Thanks for slowing down at least a little bit.
I tried.
know.
I talk too fast
Must
now.
be from New York or something. But regarding the gap or the production need for unincorporated, the 1,400 or so units, did you all take into consideration the lack of infrastructure that often exists in unincorporated parts of the county, like water and things of that nature, and how that might be a barrier to achieving that goal?
Certainly, it certainly is a barrier. It doesn't impact, that being a barrier doesn't impact the number that's calculated here, partly because the state wants us to say, okay, what is that demand? And we are assuming some annexation and that sort of thing as well, which is why that number is proportionally lower than some of the others. Yes, absolutely. We will come back, particularly when we're looking at the housing action plan, to say, is this doable? And if it is, how do we do it? So you're not obligated to deliver these units just because we've calculated them. And certainly that infrastructure barrier we talk about as a barrier, but it will come more into play as we look at actions to address needs.
And if I may, that brings up a follow-up question, and that is, are you able to break out this data to show what percentage of this need is in the growth management areas where there might be some additional infrastructure? Because I would think that when we set goals and objectives, there has to be some degree of, grounded in reality.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Can you speak to that?
So I would say we're not necessarily geographically allocating those 1,400 units in different areas. What we're saying is, we think if the county grows like this, like the demographer thinks it's going to grow, you're going to need that many units to accommodate it. And it's a policy call about where you do that. So if you say, look, we're only going to be able to deliver this if we put this in the growth management area, great, that's a policy choice. We're not necessarily saying you need this many units in Red Feather and you need this many units outside of these municipalities. So we're not necessarily getting to that. I think that to some extent is a policy choice to say, where can we accommodate these units and how do we want to do that? So I mentioned community engagement a couple times.
Can you pause just,
of
Commissioner
course.
Stevens, did you want to ask anything more there? Okay, thank you, I'm sorry to
Oh, no,
interrupt you.
absolutely. Feel free to interrupt. It's totally fine. So engagement, there's lots of engagement described in the report. Certainly, I'm just going to do kind of a quick hit on a couple of the highlights, but it include resident and employer surveys, focus groups, community meetings, as well as interviews. And so you kind of see there, I think, there's lots of content in there. I'm going to try to stay high level today as we zip through some of it, but I'm happy to answer more questions. And I've kind of pulled out a couple of these survey questions that I think help move us into thinking about what do we do about some of these needs as opposed to focusing on some of the survey and analysis that focused on the needs. This is kind of a little bit of our inflection point toward how do we start thinking about actions and solutions. So I'll run through a couple of these. Feels like we have questions.
Since I was spending some time up there, in Estes Park in the Estes Valley, it's a outlier, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's an interesting, I've been going up there every year of my life since I was 4 months old, so.
Yeah.
It's changed, and it's got a lot outside of investment now coming in. It's influencing that, and I'm wondering how that influences some of this data, or did you kind of maybe, but it still has a workforce, but, how do you account for those numbers? Because they are a little outside of the the normal range of who can afford that, and so, yeah.
For sure. It is, I would say, particularly challenging in communities like Estes Park that have both a very seasonal workforce, have a tourism-driven economy, have a lot of second homes. I mean, all of those dynamics are really challenging. That is, in that sense, they are more similar to, some of the communities we see like Steamboat and, some of our ski towns and Breckenridge and those types of things. We look at comps for them in particular. Estes Park is doing their own housing needs assessment separate from this as well. That gives us a chance to dive into some of those issues. We've worked in that community a couple of times with them, and then we're about to start working with them specifically on some of their action plans. So it really, those needs are captured to some extent here, but the seasonality and the nuances of those needs, I would say, are not fully expressed in this report. But they've got kind of a deep dive on some of their challenges that we'll be working with them on, as well as some strategies that are really tailored to some of that seasonality as well.
Yeah, and just one other factor I think plays into this, it's different than Steamboat and others. In Breckenridge, there's a national park.
Right.
That has 4.5 million people come and visit it, though it's been slowing down. And I think that's a different factor, and you have different, even though they are some seasonal, Rocky Mountain National Park is doing their own work on increasing housing stock inside of their park in already developed areas. But, I mean, that, to me, that creates a whole different nuance that's different than some of the other mountain ski towns. So,
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So I just wanted to kind of share that because that does impact a lot of things. So,
Yep, that's a great point, for sure.
Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, so with the survey, were people invited to do the survey, or was it the survey mailed out? So
Great
is
question.
it statistically valid, or is it really just people that we engaged with?
Great question. So we do what's called a snowball sample, which means it is not a true random sample. So anyone can take it that wanted to take it. The perks of that is that it does let us kind of get a broad swath. We typically get more respondents actually from that kind of sample. The risk there, as you pointed out, is that what if it's not representative? And so what we do as we go along with that kind of sample is we're tracking demographics along a handful of different cross sections to see, are we getting geographic diversity? Are we getting renters and owners? Are we getting racial and ethnic diversity? Are we getting income diversity? And so we're looking at those as we go. And then when we feel like we're low on one kind of demographic measure, we try to promote surveys to that group. We work through a lot of the county context and distribution methods. We also work through a lot of stakeholders and service providers in the area. And so as it turned out, we actually ended up getting, it's not a random sample, but our demographics on the survey were very, very similar to the demographic profile of the county overall as measured by ACS data. And so we did line that up. And so we feel like we have a very robust sample. We can't technically call it a random sample or put statistical margins of error on it, but we do feel like we got what would be representative overall. Also, as you'll see in the report, we try to break out different demographic groups because a lot of times, as you'll see on this slide too, owners give very different responses than renters, and so that all responses may be proportional, but it may not tell you as much as looking at more the nuanced kind of specific demographic group, and so we try to break that out as best we can as well.
Thank you.
So we had over 1,000 responses on the survey. I think one critical question is what would make you feel more secure. This points back to what Commissioner Stevens was asking about before. Is even renters are saying what they want is finding a home they can afford, or help with down payment and closing costs, or help getting a loan. So lots of home ownership interest among your renters, but certainly they're feeling like it's hard to do that without some type of support or help. Though I do want to at least acknowledge that more than a quarter of renters that responded also said, I need help paying my rent, or I need help learning how to buy a home. And so there are still some rental specific needs that aren't necessarily related to homeownership, but certainly a lot of emphasis on that in terms of what would help make folks feel more secure. In terms of barriers to homeownership as well, this takes a little deeper dive on that. But I think one thing that was most interesting to me out of this is that we do ask renters, what's your interest in a deed restricted product, even if it means that impacts your resale, right? So how willing are you to accept help if it also constrains you on the exit of your home? And there was very high interest in that. So that shows us that renters are really open to a new model of homeownership. What does that look like? Maybe I'm willing to do that for a few years in order to get into that. And so there's lots of room to explore potential programmatic solutions for that, in addition to trying to create more affordable market rate housing. Of course.
Caught my attention real quick. That I hadn't seen as we switch slides. But in the middle column at the.
Commissioner, can you turn your mic on?
Yeah, sorry, Justine, I appreciate it. Something that caught my eye as we switched, and I want to just make sure I kind of answer it. Now, it seems almost like flipped from the renters, but the owners says none of the above was 55%. That just kind of stuck out to me.
Yep, that's a great point, and that is, I like to keep the none of the above on that line because I think it's important to know. I mean, the question is phrased as what would make you feel more secure? And that tells us that most owners feel pretty secure, right? Whereas only 1 in 10 renters feel secure enough to not answer that question or to say none of these things. And so that is also an indicator of the stability that homeownership can provide.
I appreciate that. I mean, and that's what I was curious if that's what it meant, and that certainly is striking. Is that common across Colorado, or is it just our county, or?
I would say that is pretty common across the board in terms of the stability that homeownership affords to folks that, I mean, they're locked in on a monthly payment. They know what that looks like. Now, that can diminish over time. I would say when we look at this by age, none of the above goes down for older adults, even when they're homeowners, because they are worried they may not stay in their home, or they may need some additional services, or they're on a fixed income and don't feel like they can keep up with some of those changing expenses within homeownership. But broadly speaking, this is pretty similar to what we see across communities.
Let me build on my next question. I'll let you ask your question, Commissioner Gonzalez, if you don't mind. When you talk about locked in and monthly payment, I kind of have a little bit of concern about that because me as a homeowner, the biggest increases, there's not locked in as homeowners insurance, which is really a problem right now in Colorado that I have been working on with the Colorado Insurance Commissioner. Him and I have been having lots of conversations. He's been pulling out some data. And, you know, my insurance rate with no claims jumped up $2,001 year. That changes that payment that I could not, you know, plan ahead. Then also, you know, when we had the spike in home evaluation values, and so that impacts folks, and that could really change for some folks who maybe could afford their home. You know, I always go, my husband, you know, when we first bought this home, it's about $1,000 more a month than when we first had mortgage payments. That could be significant for folks, and I'm curious. So so that to me, the homeowners insurance is something I was surprised not to see on, you know, concerns. So I want to just make that point. I think that it's not locked in. It could go up, you know, $100 to a few $100s a month. And I know that's happening in Estes Park and others in the high risk areas where they might not even be able to get homeowners insurance. So I think that's also something it might push people out of their homes, and I just kind of wanted to make note of that.
No, great point. That was certainly an oversimplification to say that it's locked in. And I think we heard that in particular from in focus groups when we were talking to folks in more mountain and rural areas, that they're seeing that more dramatically, certainly in wildland interface. That's a huge issue and is becoming more of an issue countywide. Great point.
And I think everyone in the whole state, even if there's no hail in your state, is paying for hail, and that's a big driver of the rates as well.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Gonzalez, your hand was raised.
Thanks. I think my question has been addressed, but I'll just build on the exchange that just occurred. I think another aspect of this is property taxes. I mean, the high cost of homeowners insurance, especially if you're in the wildland urban interface. People on fixed incomes, 17% of the people are 65 and older. So it seems like somehow as we try to sort through all this, that probably needs to be an area of priority. How do we help folks stay in their homes? They're often saying that the senior homestead exemption is not increased, even though expenses have increased. You know, just on the first $100,000, they get a bit of a tax break. So I think that's important to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Great point. And I think something that we want to continue to look at as we roll into actions as well. We also ask respondents to identify how important are different housing types. And when we say housing types in this question, we're really saying, who do you want to make sure there's housing for in your community? I think it's clear that the respondents to the survey, so the residents of the county, are saying, we really want to accommodate a range of people. We don't want to become kind of exclusionary or have a more exclusive community. The highest rated household type was housing affordable to those in public service or retail jobs. It's pretty hard for those folks right now, particularly on the retail side, to afford housing. The next highest was housing for folks on a fixed income. The next highest was starter homes. And so really looking at some of that diversity in terms of income diversity for who we want to make sure that the household is accommodating. And then we looked at, well, how do we accommodate those folks? We also ask, well, how interested are you or how open are you to various housing structure types? And I would say your residents responded in a very open way to a wide range of housing types, particularly some of what we call soft density. So duplexes, townhomes, and ADUs, wide range of acceptance of those in current neighborhoods. So the shading on this graphic says, if they answered green, they say that's appropriate in my neighborhood. If they answered blue, they're like, yeah, that's appropriate in my place, but not like in my neighborhood, right? And then the yellow is, I don't want this anywhere in my community, right? So very, very low numbers typically on the not appropriate, high level of appropriate in my neighborhood, which I think is clearly an indicator that folks are open to a wide range of housing types, which is positive. I mean, a lot of times in communities we see, yes, we want to accommodate these people, but we don't like any of the housing types that do that. Whereas I felt like the responses here were a little more consistent across those two, which is great. And I think, you all have already done, and communities within your county have already done a lot of work on land use and zoning to make sure that these types are allowable. But we'll talk about kind of in the actions, how can we continue to push some of those forward?
Can I just ask a question
Of
here?
course.
Commissioner Stevens.
Not in my community. Did we define community any kind of way? Nobody, 22% of people don't want apartment buildings in any part of Larimer County?
Well, that's a
What is that,
great
maybe
point.
I'm
It
reading
doesn't mean not in Larimer County. So we let people sort of self-identify community. Typically, folks identify that at the place level. So that 22%, and I think we have this by sort of unincorporated or elsewhere in Larimer County. So out of your major cities, folks were much less likely to say, I want an apartment building that's more than 3 stories. And that's because they're thinking of it like, are you going to plunk that down in the middle of unincorporated area or in the middle of kind of what feels much more suburban or rural. So that 22% doesn't mean 22% don't want it in Larimer County. They're saying, well, not in my immediate community. Does that help?
It does, because it's going to happen in our community.
Right.
If we need to build affordable housing, it's going to be 3 stories or more.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Not necessarily the caveat is not necessarily where there's no water or in
Right.
unincorporated, but in parts of Larimer County that are urbanized, this is going
Yes.
to occur.
And when you look at Loveland and Fort Collins, which just as indicators of obviously more urban context, I don't remember exactly what that 22% is, but it's much, 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 much smaller. So that is a lot. That is, I would take that as sort of a context clue, not a county clue.
And I think the key was 3+ because it looks 3 stories plus because the other one is very
Up to
small.
3.
So it seems like there's, kind of a tipping point there. So wanted to make note of that.
Yep,
Thanks.
great point. And finally, on survey responses that we'll talk about here, we also ask folks, what are you willing to do or what are you willing to accept in order to create more affordability in your community? Again, pretty good responses of things that people are willing to do. Topping the list is allowing duplexes and townhomes, which we talked about a little bit in that previous one. But also majority support, and this is not a poll, but majority of respondents said, yeah, I'm willing to see higher property taxes on high-value homes. We didn't define that, high-value homes, but just that had a lot of response. Requiring developers to make a portion of units affordable, and then allowing small lots, and even majority support for paying $50 a year in taxes to support a housing fund. So again, this is not a political poll. It is not intended to inform a ballot initiative, but it does give you some indication of the appetite that folks have in order to taking responsibility and participating in a public solution to create more affordability. Program priorities, again, I'll kind of gloss over this one. Lots of priorities, everybody, they're all high. And so looking at, there was wide range of acceptance across the board for a lot of these program priorities. And stakeholders, I would say, in our conversation with stakeholders, they do have a kind of more nuanced perspective on some of the needs, but a lot of what we heard from them was really affirming the things that we had already talked about or already seen in the data. So affordability remaining a clear challenge, certain populations that are facing those disproportionate needs. So that's really helpful as we think about programmatic solutions and tailoring different programs and policies. mismatch between housing supply and local needs. We know that. We've talked kind of through that. We also talked about barriers to new development. So infrastructure certainly came up as part of that, water as well, in addition to community opposition. So despite some of those survey responses that we saw where there's fairly favorable or openness to development types, developers are still saying, this is hard, we're getting pushback, that creates a barrier. Gaps in services that affect residents with the greatest needs, so limited emergency shelter beds, lack of temporary housing options and services, transportation challenges in rural and mountain areas in particular, and for those areas as well, some of the challenges in accessing services came up. Stakeholders did suggest a variety of solutions. We're going to be digging into those more as we roll into the Housing Action Plan, which is kind of the next phase of this work, which I'll jump to. No, I won't jump to. I thought I was jumping to this slide, but I wasn't. So let's go back to this. So I know I kind of ran through that fast, but I want to leave a little time for discussion as well. In terms of recommended actions, this is where we're starting to move into the housing action planning. We've got some preliminary recommendations in your draft report, which I'd like to get your feedback on shortly. But those are roughly continuing regional collaboration, consider funding source options, allocating publicly owned land to affordable development, preserving existing housing that's serving low and moderate income households, implementing land use and zoning modifications. To some extent, you've already done some of those things, the heavy lift on some of those. Refine or expand development incentives, and then assist and stabilize existing households. So we're going to come back because I want to get your thoughts on these specifically, but let me just wrap up quick with kind of the what's next, and that is, as I've referenced, the Housing Action Plan. So we pull all of these findings from the H&A into that. We also pull in some of the nuanced engagement that focuses on some solutions and priorities. A lot of that's from stakeholders, some of that's also from residents, but we really design the engagement going into this process to be able to inform both the housing needs assessment and the housing action plan. So we'll be pulling a lot of that in as well, and then looking at goals and actions and how will that get drafted. So we're just kind of in kickoff mode on some of the housing action plan components, but that is kind of what's next. And so as we think about kind of our discussion, I think we've talked through a lot of the data already, but I'm still happy to answer any questions that you might have on any of the data analysis. And then I'd love to get your initial thoughts, even just kind of gut reactions on some of the preliminary recommendations or what you want to see in that housing action plan process. I'm not looking for really specific answers across each of these questions. These are really just prompts to get kind of a conversation going around what do you want to see in terms of solutions? What do you want to make sure is on our list to look at as part of that process? What do you want to make sure staff is thinking about as they're rolling into some of that as well?
Before I go to my colleagues, if you don't mind, I have a clarifying question. We have a unique circumstance in Larimer County, especially in the city of Loveland. There's over 30 metro districts. And as you look at your property tax receipt, that orange dot makes the property tax double. Mm-hmm. So the housing price point might look like, hey, this is an affordable house, but just like with homeowners insurance and with property assessments, those metro fees, if those homeowners are not, and I have, over 20 years, I've heard dozens and dozens and dozens of stories of how people were not aware of this, and there is no way to mitigate that because that is fixed in that neighborhood. So I'm not sure I saw, when we talk about affordability and price points, and when I saw the public-private partnerships, that gives me pause, because I do think we need to make sure that we call that out, that is also driving some of these unaffordability in certain parts of the county and certain municipalities, when folks aren't aware that these are quasi-judicial agencies that no one can tell them what to do or when to lower, and they seem to be not including some of the state statutes that said you had to cap things. So I think that's a nuance, especially for this area. Even though some of them are going to be aging out soon, it still has driven prices of the metro districts are not going away. And and they keep approving more and more that there's 100 mills on that house. So I'm just curious, maybe that could be an offline, because I know that might be a complicated answer, but I'd love to have some more discussion about that.
Great.
So I appreciate you letting me add that in, because I wanted to make sure that's something I'd like to have addressed within this assessment.
Yep.
Or at least talked about.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Stevens, would you like to go start?
I'll just take a minute or two to opine. First of all, thank you. This is really great information. Nothing super surprising, honestly. We know it's unaffordable to live in our community. We know it's maybe getting worse, or at least not that it's not changing that much. So to a certain extent, not a lot of surprises. I like some of the recommended actions. I think that those are great to pursue. I want to pursue anything that would kind of address the situation that we can. So I am very supportive. The only thing that it was one of the questions was any other recommendations, and I guess I know in some communities they're looking at sort of this plug and play kind of. So if somebody had a housing product that, and we've looked at this for the cottage cluster kind of situation, but like here's a thing that you can do, and you don't have to, and we're going to approve this because we've already vetted this, right? Kind of situation. Is that helpful in any kind of way to developers to know that they would have a product that they could, I think cutting red tape is a fairly, it's low-hanging fruit, honestly. It doesn't cost us any money to do it, except maybe, improving our processes. So I guess just, are there other spaces? I know we've done some of this work, and is there more work that could be done? And is that a model that we could, we didn't see a lot of desire for the cottage clusters when we proposed that. But, are municipalities looking at anything like that to make the process easier for developers?
Yeah, pre-approved prototypes, I would say, does work in certain contexts, particularly in smaller scale contexts. So, when you're looking at more urbanized areas, you've got developers coming in like, this is my prototype and I'm doing it wherever I go. But I would say it tends to work well in ADUs. And I think on the cottage clusters, we're seeing a lot more communities try to kind of promote that because it is a great design. And so saying, look, this is pre-approved or this is what we want this to look like, I think certainly helps. Anything I agree that they can do, continue to look at process barriers, talking to developers, but the more that it's clear what is approved or what you will approve, certainly that helps.
So I'm all of the above on recommended actions.
Okay, great.
Commissioner Kafalis, we have a couple of minutes left. Did you want to go ahead and comment on that?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you. And I think as Commissioner Stevens suggested, nothing really mega surprising in terms of trends over the last 30 years. But this does encapsulate, provide some data to back up any kinds of policy decisions, actions. In terms of the data side of it, hoping that we took into consideration, for example, things like gentrification and how that might be artificially impacting the market value, the assessed value of people's homes. It gets back to people on fixed incomes. They've lived in their homes for a long time. That's a phenomenon, and I think there have been various discussions about what are some policy options there. I think that's important. Also, as we've discussed, Molly, and you did a great job when you came up to Red Feather, a lot of older homes, and perhaps we could focus on low-hanging fruit. In other words, how do we scale up resources to help people make their homes more energy efficient, to save money on heating bills and all the rest, and repairing their homes if needed. And I know, Aaliyah, you've said what we have in place and how we've scaled that up to some extent. And then, finally, regarding recommendations, one thing that comes to mind is with the engagement side of it, what are the plans for how do we follow up with folks who have participated so they know, by the way, this is the fruit of your labor of, being in a conversation or doing a survey. So I'm hoping there'll be concrete steps to follow up with communities, whether it's Red Feather or LaPorte or somewhere else, to follow up. And then otherwise, all of the above, I think we're moving in a good direction, but whatever's as tangible, and that I think that's helpful.
Great, thanks.
So I'll just quickly, and then we'll wrap up, and maybe just gratitude. I think there's a lot of great information. I haven't had a chance to talk with you, and I appreciate you've gone up to other communities. It'd be great to see if there's some opportunities to do this to help folks understand. Also, my initial thoughts are there's some things, I think, depending on what your philosophy is on housing right now, you'll see what you want to see in this. So I just like to kind of pick that apart. I think that's kind of what I take away. The recommended actions, I see several that I support, but I think I'm not going to say I recommend all of above because I have questions about costs and sustainability. And so I think that's a problem for me to understand. We start something and then we can't start it, keep it. And in these time and ages, I think I would like to maybe see what is prioritized and maybe what we need to look at what we could do. And I hate to try to do things and then not able to implement because there's no money or in the capacity. So I have caution there. So I wouldn't say I recommend all the above. I have some questions about, I'm assuming they're not listed in order of priority, but just in general. So that might be a question for offline. And I might have some more questions about the policies and programs you've seen in peer counties or across the country. I have some ideas for there. So I don't know if it's allowed for me to have a moment, maybe down the road. I haven't had a chance to kind of have a chance to speak with you. So it might be a chance just for me to pick the brain if that would be okay to request. And then we're out of time, but I really appreciate all this great information. I think having our housing partners, I want to thank the City of Loveland and City of Fort Collins for having their staff here to listen in and show kind of their partnership and collaboration and to working on this together. And I thank you for that. Thank you for being here in person. And I look forward to kind of getting their feedback as well from other partners. So we're out of time. I wish we had more time, but and I would give Lorinda some chance, but we're going to close. But I think there's more to discuss. And thank you, Aaliyah. I know you're working furiously in this place, and there's a lot happening. So I look forward to a continued conversation. So at 11:02, we are adjourned from this work session, and thank you all for joining us. Lots of important information to share today. Thank you.
Thank you.